Can't think of your miss what are you doing? Even the puss dog and rat, I cry for you. So mama, papa, granny nanny, Captain Kojo, guide over us, guide our journey. We give thanks for the roots and culture that you leave for us to go through.
When the gold puppets were isolated from the mainland, because it has a whole lot of racial advocacy, of course, that anytime they look at different, so they were dark. The other thing is that their sense of outsiders, their sense of pride in the culture, and the history just parallels. Well, those are the things that come to mind when I think about how they parallel very much with the gold culture.
But I can tell you, this is my first time in Charleston, and you know, I'm learning a lot about the Gullah Geechee people. And as we do this research and we take this film forward, I look forward to learning more about the history and culture of the Gullah Geechee. You had questions?
A lot of Maroons are still along the coast.
Okay.
Yeah, from Virginia on back down.
Along the coast of the Carolina.
Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia. Well, with a color
yeah. I mean, I think what really fascinates me, though, is that again there are many parallels. You know, I think that the sense of the fact that the Jamaican Maroons and the Gullah Geechee people have retained much of their sort of their Africanness, so to speak, but also the contributions that both cultures have made to their respective home countries, so to speak, in terms of you know, history, culture, cuisine, music, things of that nature. So there are many parallels. Right.
Not much was discussed in history of the liberated territories. The sister here just mentioned the Gullah situation, which is the same situation, but we don't get that influx of that. I mean, we hear about Haiti, but as you said in the film, the Maroons are the inspiration for the Africans, but we don't hear about that. And sometimes I think it's a little bit unfair, although it's a great recognition, but it's a little unfair just to say, hey, we have things like in Jamaica and Brazil and different Maroons who, these fighters and whatnot. And one other thing I just want to add in, another thing that's not mentioned in the film, many of the Maroons, although from Ghana and different places, there was a thing that happened here where in the West, they were saying not to bring any more Africans here, particularly who were Muslim, because these were strong fighters, and many of them were Maroons and whatnot. So I just want, but the question was going back to why that recognition. We recognize in Haiti, but not that much is spoken in terms of Maroon liberated territory.
Okay. Now, let me address, first of all, let me honor you, sir, as an elder. I think that Roy, in making this film, obviously relied tremendously on the elders, both the elders who were with the ancestors and the elders here, because they are truly the gatekeepers of this tradition. I can tell you that, you know, growing up, we didn't really, my dad is a Maroon, you know, that's where my ancestry comes from. Growing up, we didn't really, even though it was all around us, growing up in Kingston, we didn't really understand, I didn't understand what it meant to be a Maroon until I immigrated to the States, became an academic. I was off studying diverse She did not agree with it. In any case, part of the treaty was that all hostilities would cease. That's number one. The Maroons were also given territory, which, if you think about it, they kind of lost out on because they had the entire mountain range to roam. Now in the east, they were given 1,500 acres. In the west, they were given a particular amount of land, right? Now, what price would one pay for peace? I think that's the central question here. When you're tired of fighting, and the British say to you, we want to be at peace with you, but in order for us to live in peace, henceforth, you have to return every runaway slave that seeks refuge outside of the plantation system. With regard to one set of Maroons, they had to return runaway slaves that ran away within the last 2 or 3 years. Right? Now, with Kojo's group, the British kind of said, well, if you don't return these slaves, they can live with you, but then, you have to sort of order them and tell them what to do. So the Maroons did sign that treaty, and as a result of that, they became, I guess, what I would call the attack dogs of the British. From 1738-39 henceforth. They hunted down and captured other slaves. They put down rebellions. They were ready to serve the British as the Spanish and even the French planned to attack Jamaica. And so they were sworn to defend the British from domestic and foreign enemies. Now, the Maroons signed what is called the Ashanti Oath, or the Ashanti, the Ashanti Treaty, where they cut themselves, and the British officers had to cut themselves. They threw a little rum in there, some bush, and they had to drink it. That kind of oath, that Ashanti oath, cannot be overturned. This is forever. So whatever they agreed to, they pretty much had to do it. But I can see both points. On the one hand, a lot of Jamaicans said, well, you won your freedom, and now you prevented us from attaining ours. But on the other hand, you can look at it in the context of the European, and particularly the British, I would say, practice and policy of divide and conquer. If you look at it in the Atlantic world, in the larger picture, the British used, and I'm just using the case of the British, but we can apply this to the French and other European colonial powers, that they would, during the colonial period in Africa, for example, they would employ certain blacks in the military forces, in the police forces, to put down what they called agitators, troublemakers, who were trying to win independence. So I see it in essence then as part of the divide and conquer strategy of the British, of using one set of blacks, right? They would give gifts to the Maroon chiefs, clothing and things of that nature, jewelry, right? Make them feel special so that they would do their bidding. But again, finally, what were the Maroons to do? You could either fight forever, but in my opinion, I think that the British would ultimately have caught up because they had the entire, they had other colonies. They could have brought in soldiers from other places, and I think that ultimately the Maroons would have been crushed. And what proves this point is the Second Maroon War, when the British actually confronted the Maroons, and they, one group of Maroons, and they had to surrender. Over 500 of them were sent to Nova Scotia, and then ultimately to Sierra Leone.
So I'm just wondering if after slavery there was some sort of reconciliation between the formerly enslaved Africans and the descendants of the Maroons.
I think that to this day there is still a sense of, when it comes to Maroon business, I think that there's this kind of love-hate relationship in Jamaica. Because on the one hand, people understand that they were brave, they fought for freedom, and they won it. But on the other hand, they put down other rebellions. And so there's this animosity. But I think that as the years go by, more and more people are recognizing their bravery, and I think that it is, in my mind, a source of pride for all Jamaicans. Yes?
So it's mentioned in the film, but not really discussed, the role of the Amerindians in Maroon societies, and particularly in the continental U.S., Native American tribes are a large influence on Maroon societies. So can you talk a little bit about that historically and about what that's meant in the contemporary world as well?
Thank you. Can you hear me without this mic, or do I need this mic? I need my mic. So the question you're asking me is, are you asking me about the Arawak Taino indigenous people, or are you asking me about the Indians that were used against the Maroons?
No, I'm talking about the people that joined the Maroon Society through the Amerindian tribes in Jamaica.
Right. Well, you know, some scholars, Bev Carey, for example, articulate the idea that the first Maroons were actually not the Africans. The first Maroons were the Arawak Tainos, because they ran away during the Spanish period. And in fact, you know, in my own family, for example, and you know, I can't necessarily confirm this, but in my own family, I mean, the elders talk about the fact that, you know, they talk about our hair. I don't have hair anymore. You know, I was going bald and I had to chop it off. But you know, some of my relatives, for example, they look, you know, when people look at them, they're looking at a mix of African and Indian. Now, according to my father, for example, that mix is not of African and Indian, i.e. subcontinent Indian mix. That's African and Arawak. Because oral history has it that when the Maroons took to the mountains, they already found the Arawak Tainos there. And in fact, Bev Carey in her book, The Maroon Story, asserts that the Maroons even got the idea of jerking pork, you know, wild boar, chicken, fish from the Arawak. Now, most scholars actually really, they don't buy an argument because there is an overwhelming body of information to assert that the Maroons, the Africans, were the first Maroons. But I actually think that there is some validity to it, and I'm basing some of that on you know, my own family history. I'm, by the way, writing a biography of my Maroon father as we speak. Yes, sir.
You mentioned Maroons in South America and Central America. Do you have any records of Maroons being in the United States? Particularly, I heard some talk about Maroons in Georgetown, South Carolina. Have you ever heard anything like that?
The Black Seminoles, Florida, for example. You know, I think it really goes back to the how do we define Maroons, right? Can we say that every slave who escapes is a Maroon? You know, so, and my answer is no, really. But as far as the literature goes, I mean, I've even heard, you know, some people would articulate that the Gullah Geechee are Maroons, right? Because they experienced the same geographical isolation, the same resistance to slavery, and the same level of, or similar level of African retentions as the Jamaican Maroons that has carried over until today. So one can find Maroons in El Choco, for example, on the Pacific coast of Colombia, which is also part of my research. There are Maroon towns in Ecuador, for example, in El Valle del Chota, in Ecuador, in Chincha, in Peru, in essence, in Suriname, Mexico, particularly in Mexico, in La Costa Chica, there are Maroon communities there. Yes, sir.
as a fellow Maroon, I can tell you there's a lot of secrecy.
Yes.
The oral tradition did not exist in our time. My dad wanted me isolated from the country. He didn't explain to me that my grandfather had 5 women with a lot of kids before he married his grandma. So there was a lot of heavy African things that went on. He didn't want me to know about the rituals. He didn't want me to know about the sacrifices. And he refused to take me up there. I took my kids there when Colonel Harrison came home. This is where our ancestors came from. And I took them up to the mountain. But there were a lot of, because the Maroons didn't have a good reputation. They were supposed to be violent. They were supposed to be turncoats. And so we need to remember that there is it's not a homogeneous group. So when they talk about that, later said, big people talking, don't listen. I was a little person. They didn't want to talk about. I now have aunts and uncles that I didn't meet because of stupidity.
Well, I mean, I think that you know, if you think about it in the film, when the filmmaker asked people, "What do you know about the Maroons?" Right? People would say that they're dark-skinned, they live up in trees, they have tails, right? So I think that, you know, like growing up in Jamaica, for example, you know, I was teased that I was dark. These are black people teasing me that I was dark, right? So going back to the Maroons, a lot of people don't really talk about it in Jamaica because, frankly, they're ashamed of it. They're ashamed of it because they think it's too close to being African, right? And obviously this is not unique to Jamaica. You could find it in New York, where I spent most of my life. You could find it here, right? The idea that you want to distance yourself from being African or of African descent. And I think that that is definitely a product of the period of slavery as well as the period of colonialism, where being African or of African descent was definitely a bad thing. Now, secondly, this issue of secrecy. The issue of secrecy is a double-edged sword because, on the one hand, the Maroons have been able to survive to this day. I'm able to stand here to this day because my ancestors were secretive, they were diligent, they were brave, and they fought. They were isolated geographically for the most part. But in a modern society, when you know, you have cell phones and the internet, and you can jump on a plane and be in Jamaica in 3 hours, and when you have Maroons who migrate, right? We love to travel. I have family in Britain, in the States, in Canada, all over, right? And I love to travel myself. So when you have young Maroons who cannot find employment, as you saw in the film, there's nothing for them to do, then the culture starts to die out. So then, can you be secretive in that sense? Because if you keep this culture, this history, this tradition, and if you hold it on, and take it with you to your grave, then the culture dies out. So I would argue that Maroons are trying to open up, but not too much. You know, this film, for example, this was a difficult project to do. Right? You saw in the film that a BBC crew went to a compound, and the guy, as we would say in Jamaica, mash it up. Mash it up. You know, he took the camera and, you know, because Maroons are very sensitive to their history. They don't like when people come in and try to degrade it. So it's a difficult balance, right? What they're trying to do is to, I would say, market their history and culture, but in a responsible way. They want people to know about it and to respect it. They want people to come there, but they want to make sure that people respect
that's a different. I hesitate because it's a kind of a loaded question. I mean, Poco. You see, even though the majority of Jamaicans are of Akan ancestry from what is today Ghana, different groups of Africans came in over the centuries. For example, Poco is mainly from sort of the area that is the Congo, Angola, and many of them came in the 19th century. So over the centuries, you find different sort of traditions, different African traditions surviving in Jamaica, and like most Creole societies, you have a lot of syncretism, right? So you have the Maroons mixing their African traditions with Christianity. As you saw in the film, you saw the traditional healer making references to the Bible. You saw the elders, the women, dancing around in a circle using the Bible. And so a lot of the, what defines sort of the blackness in Jamaica, so to speak, especially among people who observe their traditions, is syncretism, is the bringing together of the European with the Native American, if you will, and the African, and mixing them together and creating a new religion in a way. And this is really the hallmark of New World society, that we sort of merged everything and created something new.
I want to compliment we like to call, I'm a holistic physician. That was a shaman man. Mm-hmm. And he was talking about the grape plant. That's what you get resveratrol from. He knew it was good for the heart.
Yeah.
I was in Kenya and I went with the shaman man. A lot of the things we're using now in holistic medicine are African herbal plants.
I'm sorry. He was just making a comment about some of the herbs used in the film and the fact that actually the Maroons are known as great healers, natural healers. And I mean, I think even though, in the medical profession, traditional knowledge hasn't always been respected. I think that I do see an upswing across the globe where people are really taking a second look at traditional forms of healing.
He talked about the aloe vera plant, very important, and he talked about fig, and he talked about grape, essential. Now, I'm not being racist. Don't eat white grapes. You want the purple grapes. White grapes don't have resveratrol in it. If you're going to drink wine, drink purple wine.
I'm sorry?
Are they using Western medicine at all? Or just
I mean, they do get doctors who visit Maroon communities, which are very remote, and they do. In the case of the Windward Maroons, where my ancestry is from, they have to go to the closest town, which is Port Antonio. But if you go to a Maroon town today, right now, you will find men and women who will sell you a bottle of tonic, they would call it, or herb, or roots, which for a variety of different ailments. Yes?
I'm not sure if you mentioned the reverse, because I wasn't in here, that people take trips to go to the healer in the Maroon towns. So, she's asking about them going out for Western medicine, but people take secret trips.
Right, yeah, a lot of people fly to Jamaica and go for spiritual advice. That's it? I'm sorry. There's one more.
In the film, they had mentioned something about there was no murders. control the violence population? I mean, how do they keep the violence down, the murder and the killing down?
I would say that their sense of community. Maroons are very close-knit. Now, don't get me wrong, they fight, we fight, right? When you come from a warrior tradition, you fight, and not always physically, but you know. But I think that because they maintained this traditional West African political organization, right? They have their colonel chief at the head, and they have the council of elders. Now, I should probably also mention that the treaties that were signed in 1739, even though they were signed between the colonial British government and a group of Maroons, the Maroons hold that they still stand today. So even though Jamaica became an independent nation state in 1962, and that's why it's celebrating 50 years of independence today, the Maroons maintain that they signed a treaty with the British government, not with the Jamaican government. So the treaties, they believe, still hold true. So the reason why I mention that is that the Jamaican government does not normally intercede in Maroon affairs. So if someone steals someone's goat, or if someone, takes some land, the colonel will settle it. Now, the only way that the Jamaican government is supposed to intervene is in case of a murder. And this was actually in the treaty itself, where the British agreed that the Maroons would try their own cases and prosecute their own cases, but only whenever it comes to whenever there's an issue of the death penalty, then they would have to hand it over to the colonial government. And that is still the case today. So they've been able to mediate violence through maintaining this political structure. Yes?
I believe I noticed in the film that there weren't any mass communication. And maybe that's something to think about in reference to what this woman just asked. Because the town seemed wayward, not that it was primitive in any way, but with mass communications, got a whole lot of violence.
Well, I mean, actually, Maroons have 1, 2, in fact, in Jamaica, everyone has 2 cell phones. And Maroons are no exception. They have a cable and wireless here, and they have a digicel here, So Maroons have it, but I really do think that because they have this sense of their history, this longe d'oreille of their history, that kind of keeps them together because they know they have a unique history, and so they try to mediate that. But when it comes to outsiders, then they're very lovely people, but don't tick them off, basically.
That's right.
When we started this conversation, I was thinking that for Indigenous people, we seem to be a prototype of Maroon people. Okay. As we talk and have had some mixed feelings about that. But what really impressed me was the cohesion between them. And I kind of felt like we African Americans had that kind of cohesion. We would be more successful.
Well, I mean, one of the Maroon chiefs was saying that the Jamaican government periodically sends their police officers to Maroon Town to study them and to figure out how they're able to maintain, one murder in 20 years. And in the case of that murder, it was a police officers going in there to buy some ganja.
No, ain't got teeth it, and ain't got for go buy it.
Which is a no-no.
Ain't got for teeth it, that's a different story. Ain't got for teeth.
To go on that island, and when I talked to one of my cousins who lives here in West Ashton, she said, well, you have to go to the elder, and he said, they don't want any trouble over there, and it's only accessible by boat.
One way in, one way out. Actually, there was a Maroon community community called, and I'll say it in Patois, Minosenyo no come.
There you go.
So they don't want no trouble. You know, when you go there, you behave yourself because you can't get out. You know, so, you know, there's no way that you're going to escape. Yes.
I just had a question about the role of women and gender in Maroon societies.
Okay.
The film sort of shows them as being very fierce historically, but what is that in the contemporary world, and how is that played out historically? Is there a different sense of gender roles within Maroon society than within Jamaica as a whole?
I mean, I would say that there is a division. There was a division of labor. Women did, you know, they farmed. Men were warriors. But remember that the greatest Maroon general was Nanny of the Maroons, right?
Yes.
The greatest Maroon general was Nanny of the Maroons. So, and this is nothing new. If you look at African history, whether you're talking about Queen Zinga, or whether you're talking about Ya Santewa, or a variety of different women, Queen Amina of Darwa, there were African women who led, so this was nothing new. There are some in recent years. There have been a few books on Nanny. One is called "Mother of Us All." Now, the problem with the story of Nanny is that most of it. Well, let me rephrase that. I shouldn't say the problem. You know, sometimes I wear my historian's hat, and you know, most of it is based on oral history and on legends. And so you know how most historians feel, right? If it's not written down, how can we verify it? But I think that archaeology, for example, anthropology, and other social science and humanities disciplines have made great contributions to sort of resurrecting the story of Nanny, so that we can see how she was able to lead her people. And by the way, the reason why she was so powerful, according to the Maroons, was because she was a science woman, right? That's what the Maroons, you know, I mean, when I was growing up in Jamaica, for example, and true story, when I was in, I guess you call it junior high school, we call it primary school back then, the textbooks that we got, I remember one story that said that when the British were fighting the Maroons, right, they would be shooting at Nanny, right, and she would take the bullets right here, right, and shoot them back out.
There you go.
And kill the British soldiers. Now, I'm trying to get those books I'm trying to get those books because if my memory serves me right, those stories were not portrayed as myths or legend. They were portrayed to us as history.
That's right.
If my memory serves me right, you know, because when you read books, right, they'll say that this is a myth.
Right.
But so she had a big three-legged pot where she had some potions boiling, and then when the British soldiers would look in there, they would all fall in. I mean, this woman was, she had supernatural powers, and they, to this day, that's what they believe. So when you ask the question, how did a group of ragtag Africans in the woods beat the greatest military might on earth, then that's how they will explain it, right? They had the territory, they perfected guerrilla warfare, but they also had the supernatural on their side. Now, you know, believe cures and believe kills. So, yeah.
On the idea of Nanny, I noticed in the film they portrayed her as a warrior type woman. And how does that juxtapose, I mean, with the movie, how did you juxtapose that with the image that they portrayed now in Jamaica as the mammy type? I mean,
well, actually, I mean, I think, and what Lisa is referring to actually is the fact that Queen Nanny is on the Jamaican $500
bill.
We actually call it the Nanny. That's the name that most people use for it. Now, I'm not sure if I agree that, at least when I look at the image of Nanny, I actually don't see a mammy type, but I could be wrong. What I see is a portrayal of a traditional West African woman with the headdress and things of that nature. But I mean, that might be something to look into more, to see how this image, who came up with this image and what their mindset was.
Hold on, excuse me.
The movie is her portrayed as a strong woman.
And pretty much that's how she's portrayed in the literature. That's how Maroons think of her. She no play, right? She's a warrior queen, basically. Yes.
No, when we think of Nanny, we don't think of Aunt Jemima. Right. See, Aunt Jemima is a mommy type.
Yeah.
When you look at Nanny, you see a woman, like you say, mess with her, play with her, romp, because you don't know what she's going to pull out or where they hit you with. There's not an ounce of fat on her.
Yeah.
Look at her face, look at her features, look at her height, and the fact that she made, for a woman, put it this way, when you look at a society that forever had Queen Elizabeth on a bill, and you come with a black woman on a bill, everybody wants a nanny. Even if you didn't want to spend it. Anybody going to Jamaica, you wanted them to bring a nanny back for you. You got on the road, you want to come back with a nanny, because once a nanny bus, no more money left.
And by the way, when you go to there's a twist to that though. When you go to Jamaica, everybody wants give me a nanny. So you better make sure you have a couple of $500 bills in your pocket to give out.
And know how much it's worth.
Yeah. I'm sorry?
Are women ever colonels now, or is that the Paul Western?
No. But they are members of the Council of Elders. My great aunt, who's with the ancestors now, for example, she had a lot of influence on the colonel himself in terms of land rights and things of that nature. And they also, in terms of knowledge, if you really want to know the history and the culture, you may want to go to the women, because they're really the keepers of it. And they're not, they're very quiet, but they're the ones who really know.
That's right.
Thank you, I really appreciate it.